At 3:17 p.m. on July 20th, 1969, the radio began to crackle. Everyone froze. Some held their breath, and mission control was silent as Neil Armstrong's voice came through. Houston, Tranquility Base here. Everyone together? The Eagle has landed. Millions of Americans were on the edge of their seats as they watched the legs of the Apollo 11 lunar module Eagle meet the powdery surface of the moon. Half of the country's 57 million TVs were tuned into CBS, where anchor Walter Cronkite and former astronaut Wally Schirra narrated the scene. "Oh boy," Cronkite gleefully exclaimed after the Eagle touched down in the Sea of Tranquility. "Wally, say something. I'm speechless." On the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, CBS Sunday Morning News relived the moment. Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, a tough, skeptical reporter's reporter who had stared down death covering World War II, was overwhelmed by what had just happened. How easy these words are rolling off our lips now, Cronkite reflected years later. Man on the moon, a walk on the moon. And yet, to say the words and to stop just a moment to think about them still sends a shiver up and down the old spine. Professor of Biblical Interpretation and New Testament Studies at King's College, Richard Burridge, proposes in his book, Four Gospels, One Jesus, that each of the Gospels portray a different portrait. Each portrait of Jesus evokes its own atmosphere, its own response from the reader, while offering a more robust understanding of the nature and person of Jesus. While Mark has Jesus dashing from place to place and appearing suddenly without warning, much like a lion, the Gospel of John takes the reader on a high-flying ride on the wings of an eagle. And while Jesus' story in the Synoptic Gospels take place in the horizontal dimensions of the geography and history of Israel, Burridge notes that John brings in the vertical. Jesus is above and beyond all of that. His place is with God. His time is before the beginning of everything. After soaring to divine heights beyond time and space, John's gospel then suddenly swoops down to earth, and the Word becomes flesh and lives among us. The next 10 chapters follow Jesus' ministry of miraculous healing and extraordinary signs. And today's text dives straight into the most well-known pairing of these miracles: Jesus' feeding of the 5,000 and his walking on water. The feeding of the multitude is the only miracle found in all four Gospels, which shows how important this story is to the identity and work of Jesus. In John's account, Jesus' miracles are not performed out of compassion like they were in Mark. Much like how Apollo 11's call signs, Columbia and Eagle, are used to identify the broadcaster over the radio, in John's gospel, Jesus' miracles are also revelatory, unveiling key aspects of his divine character and purpose. And while we encounter two of the better-known miracle stories today, miracles that over time and with enlightened minds have been explained away as an act spurring on collective generosity or walking by the water, not on it, does not stop their capacity to send, as Cronkite described, a shiver up and down the old spine. If, like an eagle, we're willing to rise above and see the deeper meanings of God. This entire text is an echo chamber of the Passover Exodus story, from the combination of a supernatural feeding and a salvation of the sea, God's provision of bread from heaven during the Israelites' wilderness wanderings, the command to gather so that nothing is lost, to Jesus' declaration to the disciples, "It is I." The details John provides in his accounts are clues that help locate hearers both geographically, socially, and politically. We're told that Jesus, after being persecuted by religious leaders in chapter 5, travels to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and a large crowd follows him, eager to see more of his miraculous healing power. And as a result, Jesus, with his disciples, climbs the mountain and sits. And it's at this point when Jesus turns to Philip and asks, as a test, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" This wasn't a moment where a quick run to Kroger or Tom Thumb or Refined Bakery or Central Market, who we all know bread's superior, Sprouts or Whole Foods or Aldi could fix. Perhaps Jesus' question jarred their memory of another revered prophet, Elisha, who also with an offering provided, and the intervention of God's power multiplied barley loaves to feed a crowd while being left with more than was needed. Perhaps Jesus' question was completely rhetorical. Perhaps Jesus' question was well-placed, creating an opportunity for the disciples to think about how they could co-conspire with Jesus and be part of the miracle itself. With elements of the Passover story woven in almost every detail, and the memories of Elisha's own feeding miracle, Jesus was fulfilling and recreating images from Israel's sacred past, and it's no wonder, then, that the crowd declared him a prophet. But as much as the crowd gets it right in their sight, they equally get it wrong. They had obtained a glimpse of the incarnate God at work, but misunderstood its meaning entirely. Franciscan priest and renowned author Richard Rohr shares a story in his book, The Naked Now, Learning How to See as the Mystics See. It begins with 3 men standing by the ocean, looking at the same sunset. One man saw the immense physical beauty and enjoyed the event itself. This man was the sensing type, who deals with what he can see and feel and touch and move, and that was enough for him. He had little interest in larger ideas, intuitions, or the grand scheme of things. He saw with his first eye, and that was good. The second man, who also saw the same sunset, enjoyed all the beauty that the first man did. Like all lovers of coherent thought and science, he also enjoyed his power to make sense of the universe and explain what he discovered. Through imagination and intuition and reason, he saw with his second eye, which was even better. And the third man saw the sunset, knowing and enjoying all the first and the second men did. But in his ability to progress from seeing to explaining to tasting, he also remained in awe before an underlying mystery, coherence, and spaciousness that connected him to everything else. He used his third eye, which is the full goal of all seeing and knowing, and this was best. Rohr goes on to explain that 2 Christian philosophers at the monastery St. Victor in Paris had names for these 3 ways of seeing. Hugh and Richard of St. Victor wrote that humanity was given 3 different sets of eyes, each building on the previous one. The first eye was the eye of the flesh, of thought, of sight. The second was the eye of reason, of meditation and reflection. And the third eye was the eye of true understanding and contemplation. Contemplation being an exercise in keeping our heart and mind spaces open long enough to see the connectedness of everything. Last Sunday, Katie reminded us that Jesus was moved with compassion as he responded to the crowd's needs. And she challenged us to wonder how we too could be moved with such compassion. Today, I want to build off that challenge and suggest that in order to be moved with such compassion, it will require a building of our sight to include all three ways of seeing. When the eyes of our soul operate within a vision of scarcity, we're unable to see the needs around us, period, yet alone be moved with such deep compassion. If we do not open our heart and mind spaces long enough to truly see the deeper meanings of God's work all around us and even within ourselves, like the crowd, we'll catch a glimpse, but miss the big picture. The crowd couldn't see past their scarcity. The abundance of the miracle overwhelmed them. They saw what they were ready to see. They saw what they expected to see, and they saw even what they desired to see. Their hearts and their minds closed to anything other than how Jesus could fit neatly into their already established religious categories. They wanted to exploit Jesus for their own purposes. The people were hungry for an earthly king, not a divine one. And they looked to seize Jesus and force their agenda upon him. As one commentator noted, distortion and fear accompanied their best efforts in understanding. Their vision was blurred. And yet, there was one who saw deeply, one who saw beyond the moment, one who saw beyond his own scarcity and instead acted out of an abundance of faith with open hands, knowing that what little he had may become a part of a miracle. A boy, a child who is carrying the meal of a traveler. In John's gospel, it's not just bread and fish. John specifically mentions the details of the child's offering. The bread that was made from barley, which was widely known to be the bread of the poor. And the fish were dried, preserved perhaps from an earlier fishing season. And then, the disciple Andrew looks at the boy's meager offering and responds by saying, "What are they among so many?" What an adult response. While in Macedonia earlier this summer, we visited Mother Teresa's grave located in downtown Skopje. It's said of her work that when she came face to face with the masses of suffering and dying in Calcutta, she experienced what she called the call within a call, namely to serve those who are suffering the most. A call that would eventually outgrow what scarce resources and knowledge that she had. However, she would later on say that love's knowledge multiplies the meager resources and makes a way forward when knowledge comes to an end. Choosing to open her mind and heart with a posture and perspective of abundance, Mother Teresa believed, much like that little boy, that miracles sure would abound. And so Jesus took the boy's meager offering, those 5 barley loaves and 2 dried fish. And with Eucharistic overtones, he gave thanks, breaking it, and personally distributing portions until the people were satisfied. And the doubting disciples were left gathering up the fragments so that nothing was lost. If we allow God to feed both our bodies and souls, we begin on a path of conversion that leads us to see, like that little boy in our story today, from the heart. And unlike the crowd's limited vision, if we, like the boy, can develop a sight that overflows with generosity and compassion and joy, with a posture of openness and wonder, then it becomes possible for us to participate in the ushering in of God's kingdom. Because the choice is ours to make. It's not a matter of if, but how. Someone once said, good religion is all about seeing rightly, because how we see is what we see. The disappointments of our world are not going away, nor are the deep needs of its people, the cries of injustice, the loss of life by senseless and brutal violence, war and terror, the disastrous effects of climate change, etc., etc., etc. And our earthly resources will always be meager. But maybe this morning we all needed to be reminded that what little we do have can be used by God to create miracles. And that sends shivers up and down the old spine. Amen.